Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today is the May 9th, and I continue with my discussion of Russian-Ukrainian war. And this presentation is called Zelensky's Mirage of Triumph. The thesis is that the current moment of what appears to be a triumph of Mr. Zelensky actually, at the close consideration, shows that it is a mirage. This is in short, but let me explain in a little more detail. Before I do that, I want to say to you, my dear subscribers, that YouTube has launched a new service, which is automatic translation in pretty much all languages that exist. So to do that, what you have to do is open my video, or for that matter, any video on YouTube, and underneath it there are settings. And once you click on settings, there would be a choice of dubbing, which is a simultaneous translation that would be written at the bottom of the screen. But in some videos you could actually do audio, and then you click on that and there will be simultaneous translation orally in a chosen language. And some of them I tried, it worked fine in French, in German, Russian, etc. But let me now get back to my main topic, and that is triumph of Zelensky. Many observers right now believe that Zelensky is in a pretty good shape because he has achieved several breakthroughs in the current political game and negotiations over the last several weeks. I guess the most important of those is what is called the Vatican moment. The world media has shown us the pictures of President Trump and President Zelensky sitting across each other, and this has of course been prepared, very well orchestrated by Macron and Starmer, and the idea is to give Zelensky one more chance to convince Trump to support his position, his approach, which means basically to continue military support of Ukraine until victory over Russia, until Russia, from the position of strength, is forced to accept basically capitulation, which means to return all the conquered territories back to Ukraine, and then the wish list goes on and on and on. However, what Trump actually said very, very clearly in a very short time, that he needs a minerals deal. And it seems that right after that moment of the Vatican moment, I call it, Zelensky agreed and did sign this deal, and it was ratified yesterday on the 8th of May by the Ukrainian Parliament, Rada. But this is the big print. But if you go to a small print, there are very important points that need to be explained. Now, first of all, specifically this agreement has 3 documents, and only one of them was ratified. And one of them, the one that was ratified, is basically very, very abstract and talks about the creation of a joint fund, and that both countries are going to invest in this fund, and then they will be drawing from that fund mostly for Ukrainian assets and Ukrainian development, blah blah blah. A lot of hot air, but not very much substance. And the substance is in the other 2 documents. And the Rada was asked to sign without reading those documents. In fact, one of them is secret. Nobody has seen it. But the Rada was smart enough, and they voted ratifying the first document, the framework document, without ratifying the other 2. And without ratifying those other 2, the first one is not valid. But the other 2 have all kinds of specifics as to who is going to invest how much, and then what specifically, and draw how much, and the whole structure of this deal is buried in the other 2 documents, which have not been ratified, and therefore they're not valid yet. However, that was still presented politically as Zelensky's big breakthrough, because now he has Trump happy. And as a result of that moment of triumph, Ukraine received some Patriot missiles from Israel and Poland, and some 300 million cash or loan or whatever they're going to write it up as spare parts for F-15 and so on and so on. So this has been created in public media as a big win and a moment of triumph in the American relations and Trump's relations with Zelensky. Now, moment of triumph number 2 is that Kellogg keeps announcing to the whole world about his great successes, in that he persuaded Zelensky and that Zelensky accepted his, which is presented as Trump's plan of peace, which would create buffer zones and zones of responsibility, and Ukraine has accepted 30-day unconditional ceasefire. And that also is presented as a great breakthrough. So now Zelensky can boast that he has unconditional support of Trump, unconditional support of his greatest allies, Britain and France, Starman, Macron, and the European Union. And at the same time, he now has the minerals deals, so all the wrinkles in the US relationship and ironed out, and we're in good shape. However, this is only one side of the story, and now I come to the most important one: why all of this is a mirage. Now, what is a mirage? Mirage is a vision in the desert, which basically shows what you want to see and not what it really is. It's kind of wishful thinking that dissipates when the sun goes up or down. So why is it a mirage? Well, let me first address the issue of the minerals deals or the rare earth deals or whatever. The reason it is a mirage is if you look at the response of Ukrainian society and Ukrainian politicians and others to this deal. And it is very, very, very negative. Now, starting with some articles that appear in open media in Ukraine, that this deal is illegitimate because it's unconstitutional. And the reason it's unconstitutional is that Ukraine constitution says that the minerals and earth and all kinds of elements that are in the ground is the property of all Ukrainian people, and it cannot be privatized, especially given abroad to some kind of fund that now controls Ukraine's resources and ports and earth and whatever. So this is unconstitutional. Moreover, it is not binding without being voted on by the Rada, and it, as I said, it didn't. But that's not even the worst. The worst is that the nationalist elements who had been basically controlling Ukrainian government ever from Poroshenko and Zelensky, the right sector and Klitschko and many other groups that are Azov detachment and other neo-Banderovite groups were de facto in control of the political affairs in Ukraine. Now they are very, very upset with Zelensky. They basically say that he is sold out to the Americans, that Ukraine has been turned into a colony of the United States, that this is unacceptable, that this is worse than the Russians. And then there are some specialists, such as Nikolai Petro, an American specialist on Ukraine, who are actually saying that the civil war in Ukraine is inevitable. If not a civil war, then a very serious resistance to Zelensky, not from those who he thought are his most ardent opponents, and that is people in Ukraine who want peace with Russia and who are secretly waiting for the Russians to come. No, it is from the Banderovites, from the right sector, from the nationalists who now regard Zelensky as a traitor who sold out Ukraine's natural resources to the Americans. So this is why this is a mirage on this point. Now let me go to the next one, which is the supposed victory with the Kellogg's plan. Now, Kellogg's plan, as we all know, the Western media highlights it very well, is basically an attempt to freeze the conflict along the lines of North Korea, South Korea. That this is going to be basically frozen along the lines of now. Ceasefire turns into permanent ceasefire. And there will be, according to this plan, some neutral zone demarcation, and that there would be a coalition of the willing, which means NATO countries, for Britain and France, would enter their troops into Ukraine, and they would be backed by the Americans. In other words, NATO will take over the rest of Ukraine and throw a bone of satisfaction to Putin by recognizing Crimea, but not Donbass. And the promise would be that Ukraine will not become part of NATO, but any promise could be revoked and reconsidered a few months ago. The only problem with that plan is that the Russians are not going to accept it. With all the smiles and handshakes and promises of good relations, the Russians and President Putin are not going to accept this plan. Why? Well, because it undermines the very nature of the war and his latest, the causes of the war. His latest 9th of May declaration with President Xi repeats the same thing, that the root causes of the conflict must be addressed. And the root causes, of course, are membership of NATO, stationing of foreign troops, terrorism that is coming out from Ukraine to Russian cities, and several other issues. So, Kellogg plan is out and it is unacceptable to Russia, and then therefore this is another mirage. Now we go to the third point. And the third point, in the speech a couple of days ago, Vice President Vance has explained to Fox News that Russia wanted too much, and everybody took it over this phrase, meaning that the American administration is not happy with Putin's demands, that they were too much. But they didn't pay attention to what Vance said after that, which means that they have to negotiate between themselves, and we're out of it. The United States is not going to get involved. Let them settle it. Now, the point, of course, is that it cannot be settled because the positions are diametrically opposite. Zelensky and Ukrainian leadership considers Donbass part of Ukraine, including Crimea, while Russian Federation considers Donbass to be part of the Russian Federation, and they're not going to go away from it. So there's nothing to talk about. It's actually irreconcilable, let alone that there are constant threats of terrorist attacks on civilian targets in Moscow and in other cities, and therefore any responsible Russian leader would have to address this issue, and he cannot sign any deal with the current administration in Kiev, meaning that if it does, it would be essentially a permanent threat of NATO bombs flying into Russia, or terrorist groups penetrating into Russia and killing another general, which is essentially acts of state-sponsored terrorism. So that means that this is unacceptable. And the most important point here in my today's discussion is that the behavior of President Zelensky in the last 2 months, since the negotiations took a more active phase, is such that he positioned himself in a way that there's no way the Russians can accept him. In other words, the Russians in their talk shows and between themselves and the experts and opinion pages are basically now saying openly, regime change is the goal. With that regime, nothing could be achieved. Therefore, there has to be a change of regime. How it would happen, nobody knows. If it's going to be Zaluzhny and the army, if it's going to be a rebellion of the right sector and the nationalists, or whether this is going to be elections imposed by the Americans or some other crisis in Ukraine. But the point is that the current mirage of triumph of Zelensky is no more than a mirage. And what is going to happen, and most likely to happen in the coming weeks, and let's say 2 or 3 months this summer, is the continued Russian advance and possibly a regime change in Ukraine. Thank you very much, and I hope you subscribe to this channel, and I hope you read my books. The latest of them is From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin. And I hope you also watch my mini-series on the World War II or Great Patriotic War, which is a few issues before this one. Thank you. Bye-bye.